1812. Most 12-year-olds in this era were busy playing marbles or helping their mothers milk cows, but not John Brown. This kid was driving a herd of cattle over 100 miles through the wilderness to deliver them to her as marshal. Impressed by the toughness of this barefoot kid, the marshal generously invited John to stay a few days before heading back to Ohio. A start that sounds as heartwarming as a Disney movie. That is, until the reality of 19th century America slapped him right in the face. Inside the house, John befriended a boy his age dressed in rags, a slave boy. The kid was smart, gentle, and even gave John a few handmade toys. Dinner that night was filled with laughter. The marshal rubbed John's head, praising him endlessly in front of the esteemed guests. The atmosphere was perfect. But the moment the door closed behind the last guest, the smile on the marshal's face vanished. He suddenly looked exactly like a demon shedding its disguise. He turned to the boy and began yelling over trivial table-setting mistakes. The boy stood there, clutching his apron. The marshal calmly walked over to the fireplace. He didn't grab a whip or a cane. He grabbed a solid iron coal shovel. Without a second of hesitation, he turned around and slammed the iron shovel directly into the slave boy's head. John stood frozen, helplessly watching his new friend get beaten hit after hit. The sickening sound of metal clashing against skull echoed chillingly in the closed room. John could smell fresh blood hitting his nose as it poured from the gaping wounds on the boy's head. Suddenly, his parents' moral lectures that slavery is a crime against God were no longer just theory. It had a shape. It had the smell of blood, and it was absolutely disgusting. In that exact moment, 12-year-old John Brown made a decision. Not to write a complaint letter, not to protest peacefully. He swore to wage an eternal war to eradicate slavery, and he kept his word in the bloodiest way possible. Before becoming an infamous killer, John Brown had to live the life of a normal man, and in the normal department, he was a complete failure. As an adult, John was a devout Calvinist, holding a blind faith that God predestined everything. Perhaps God predestined him to be an economic disaster. He tried opening a tannery, failed. He switched to real estate right before the 1837 financial crisis, bankrupt and lost everything. He gritted his teeth, borrowed money to raise sheep, and confidently took his wool all the way to London, England to sell. The result? He got scammed and lost a clean $40,000. He got tangled in legal trouble, sued in 4 different states, drowning in debt. The only asset John Brown produced with roaring success was children. He fathered 20 kids with 2 wives, more than enough to form his own personal infantry platoon. He dropped out of school at 16. By middle age, he gave up hopes of getting rich. Society viewed him as a crazy, dead-broke, delusional fool. But John didn't care, because he knew his mission wasn't to be a Wall Street billionaire. His mission was to be the Grim Reaper for pro-slavery advocates. Peak insanity, the Potawatomi Massacre and artillery swords. Fast forward to 1854. America passes the Kansas-Nebraska Act, a ridiculous law letting citizens vote if this new land would be a free or slave state. Basically, the government threw fresh meat between 2 starving wolf packs and told them to vote democratically. Immediately, thousands of pro-slavery thugs from Missouri flooded into Kansas, burning and killing. In the Senate, in Washington, when Senator Charles Sumner stood up to speak against slavery, a Southern senator beat him with a cane until his skull cracked right on the podium. The response from Northern abolitionists? They sent prayers. They wrote articles expressing deep concern. John Brown rolled his eyes at his teammates. Prayers don't stop rifle bullets. Deep concern doesn't heal cracked skulls. The law was just a cheap joke backed by cowardly politicians. It was time to bring God's justice to earth via express mail. October 1855. Receiving a cry for help from his sons in Kansas, John loaded a wagon with rifles, pistols, and specifically, French artillery broadswords. They didn't look like self-defense weapons. They looked like slaughterhouse tools. Night of May 24, 1856. Under a cold moon, John and his disciples quietly approached the cabin of James P. Doyle, an aggressive pro-slavery man. No search warrants, no Miranda rights. John simply knocked, pointed a gun, and dragged Doyle and his 2 adult sons out into the darkness. They walked about 100 yards into the woods. Suddenly, on John's signal, his sons drew those razor-sharp artillery swords. Coldly, without blinking, they began hacking the slave catchers to pieces. Screams tore through the Kansas night as blades severed arms and split skulls. To finalize the sentence, John slowly walked up, pressed his revolver to Doyle's forehead, and pulled the trigger. Boom! That night, Brown's group hit 2 more houses, repeating the bloody process. 5 heavily mangled bodies were left along the Potawatomi Creek. John Brown was now officially a cold-blooded killer. But when asked, he calmly replied he was just doing God's will. He washed his bloody sword in the creek and walked away. This sparked Bleeding Kansas. The demons had finally found their very own Grim Reaper. The devastating aftermath, the suicide picnic at Harper's Ferry, being a highly wanted man, wasn't enough. Summer 1859, John met his old friend, legendary black activist Frederick Douglass, at an abandoned quarry. John pitched a grand plan: raid the federal armory at Harper's Ferry, steal 100,000 guns, and start a total war. Douglass turned pale. "You're crazy. It's a suicide mission." Douglass refused. Anyone with wrinkles on their brain would refuse. October 16, 1859. John's men easily captured the armory, even kidnapping George Washington's descendant for his heirloom sword. Now, they just waited for the slaves to rush in. One tiny problem: nobody showed up because John kept it a secret. It was like throwing a massive birthday party and forgetting to send invites. Instead of slaves, as Marines arrived, led by Robert E. Lee, the future traitor commanding the defense of slavery, now arresting a man fighting it. History has a dark sense of humor. John was shot up, captured, gave a legendary speech on a stretcher, and hanged. But his final note was clear: this guilty land's crimes will only be purged with blood. 1 year later, 750,000 dead Americans in the Civil War proved him right. Night of October 16, 1859. The grand plan begins. Step 1. Cut the telegraph lines. Can't have anyone tweeting about the revolution. They easily sneak into Harper's Ferry. The watchman was literally asleep on the job. The raiders capture the federal armory without firing a shot. They even had time to kidnap Lewis Washington, George Washington's great-grandnephew, and confiscate his heirloom sword as a trophy. Talk about historical trolling. Everything went smoothly. Now, they just sat and waited for thousands of slaves to hear the news and rush in for their free guns. One tiny problem: not a single slave appeared. Why? Because John was too secretive. No flyers were sent, no secret messages. The slaves on nearby plantations didn't even know some bearded guy was waiting to revolutionize them. It was like throwing a huge surprise party but forgetting to tell the guest of honor. Instead of a slave army, the morning light brought local militia and angry farmers. The party was definitely over. Trapped and outgunned, Brown and his remaining men retreat to a small brick fire engine house. They barricade the doors, transforming a fire station into their final fortress. The standoff begins, and look who shows up to handle a local disturbance: the United States Marine Corps. Ironically, this unit is commanded by Colonel Robert E. Lee and Lieutenant J. Stewart. Yes, that Robert E. Lee. The very man who would later betray the us to fight for slavery is now representing us law to stop a man fighting against slavery. History is a troll with dark humor. Stewart attempts to negotiate. Brown refuses. His terms? "I'll walk out, but only if you let me bring my guns." Stewart rolls his eyes. Lee orders the assault. The Marines smash through the door with a battering ram, bursting inside. Total chaos ensues. In the melee, Brown is severely wounded and captured. The raid is over. 8 of his men are dead, including 2 of his sons. Despite being unable to stand, the state rushes him to trial. Brown is forced to lie on a stretcher in the courtroom, still bleeding, still defiant. Brown drops a classic truth bomb speech. He tells the court that if he did this violence to protect white elites, they'd give him a medal. But because he fought for the lolly, for the slave, he is labeled a criminal. He looks the jury in the eyes. The verdict: guilty. Sentence: death. No surprise there. Waiting for his end, Brown writes a final prophecy, handing it to a jailer. It wasn't an apology. It read, "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood." December 2, 1859. John Brown is hanged. Watching from the crowd of thousands are Thomas Stonewall Jackson and an obscure actor named John Wilkes Booth. The rebels are being watched by future traitors. To the north, he was a martyr. To the south, a terrorist. The nation splits even further. Time has shown that the failed entrepreneur, the man who hacked pro-slavery guys in the night, was perhaps the only sane person of his era. Just 1 year later, the American Civil War erupts. 750,000 Americans fight on the battlefield to finally solve the slavery question politicians avoided for decades. Southern states secede, ironically creating the conflict Brown predicted. The nation tears itself apart. The country is consumed by a massive, blood-soaked war, just as John foretold. And during those fiery marches, Union soldiers didn't sing about cowardly politicians. They marched to the horizon singing the song, "John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on." 1860. The ghost of John Brown was barely cold when a tall, awkward lawyer named Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. The South immediately threw a historical temper tantrum. South Carolina decided they'd rather leave the country than give up their free labor. They rage-quit the United States. Soon, 10 other states followed. They formed their own exclusive club called the Confederacy. Their main rule: we get to own people, you can't stop us. Very classy. April 1861. The South fires the first shot at Fort Sumter. It was the equivalent of poking a sleeping bear with a very sharp, very stupid stick. Both sides thought this war would last a weekend. Northern elites literally packed picnic baskets to watch the first battle at Bull Run like it was a Super Bowl game. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a game. The picnic was ruined, the Union Army ran away, and everyone realized John Brown was right. This was going to be a bloodbath. President Lincoln suddenly had the worst headache in American history. His generals were incompetent, he was losing battles, and the country was burning. Somewhere in the afterlife, John Brown was definitely holding a giant neon "I told you so" sign. The politicians had tried to compromise with a tumor, and now the whole body was dying. The Thoughts and Prayers crowd from 1859 were now screaming in panic. You can't debate a cannonball. You can't vote away a secession. By 1862, Lincoln realized a hard truth. You can't win a war just by asking the enemy nicely to return to the group chat. He needed a devastating blow. He decided to pull the ultimate historical UNO reverse cut. The war was no longer just about preserving the Union. It was now a crusade to destroy slavery forever. January 1, 1863, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. It essentially told the South, all your slaves are now legally free. Come and get mad about it. The Southern aristocrats lost their collective minds. Their entire economic system was just legally cancelled by a guy in a weird hat. Even better, Lincoln allowed black men to join the Union Army. Nearly 200,000 former slaves and free black men grabbed rifles to personally dismantle their former masters. The tide turned. The Union Army pushed through the South like a heavily armed cleaning crew sweeping out the trash. By 1865, the Confederacy was completely out of money, out of food, and out of excuses. They were fighting a modern industrial war with nothing but arrogance and cotton. April 9, 1865. Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox. The Great Rebellion for slavery collapses like a wet cardboard box. To make sure this nightmare never happened again, the US passed the 13th Amendment. Slavery was permanently banned in the Constitution. No more loopholes, no more compromises. The original sin of America was finally stamped out. But the price was unimaginably high. Over 750,000 Americans died. The rivers of blood John Brown had predicted had actually flowed. It took 500,000 lives to figure out that keeping humans in chains was a bad idea. Humans are stubbornly stupid creatures. Let's look back at the madman who started it all, the guy society executed for being an insane terrorist. He wasn't insane. He was just the only one who realized that a disease this deep required a violent surgery. They say history is written by the victors, but sometimes history is jump-started by a bankrupt farmer with a ridiculous beard and a broadsword. John Brown was a terrible businessman, a disastrous tactician, and an undeniable murderer, but he was also the spark that burned down the institution of slavery. His body has been rotting in the grave for over a century, but his soul goes marching on. 1983, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. 80 seconds America was a wonderful place where people trusted each other so naively that front doors rarely needed locks. Gary Plorch was a model father, the traditional family man, extremely proud watching his 10-year-old son, Jody, level up in his karate class. Jody's coach was Jeffrey Doucette, 24, young, enthusiastic, but with one fatal flaw: he was broke. So broke that Gary realized this teacher was using a gym mat as a bed. Moved by compassion, Gary opened his arms. He invited Jeff over for dinner, then let him crash. Slowly, he turned him into a close family friend. To little Jody, Jeff was a great big brother, taking him to movies and away tournaments. To Gary, Jeff was a trusted mentor. A perfect model family picture, until the teacher's smile revealed rotting fangs. Kindness is a luxury, especially when you accidentally hand it to a monster. February 14, 1984. Valentine's Day, instead of chocolates, Jeff gifted the Porch family a devastating shock. He borrowed Gary's wife's car to visit his uncle. The wife happily handed over the keys. A few hours later, Jeff called saying they'd stay the night. But the next day came and went. No car returned. Calls went unanswered. Waiting turned to panic. The police got involved. Turns out, Jeff wasn't visiting any uncle. He slammed the gas, driving thousands of miles straight to California. By day, he played the nice babysitter at Disneyland, but at night, in a trashy Anaheim motel, the mask fell off. For 2 weeks that felt like a century, Gary lived in hell, imagining every worst-case scenario. Until February 29 a patched-through long-distance call from the Samoa motel came in. It was Jody's trembling voice. Anaheim police immediately kicked the door down, collared Jeff, and rescued the boy. Gary breathed a sigh of relief, welcoming his son off the plane. He thought the nightmare was over. No, it had just begun. During the medical exam, the brutal truth came out. The teacher Gary fed and housed had actually abused the boy for over a year. Gary's world shattered. The justice system told Gary, "Calm down, we'll extradite him. He'll sit in jail. Jail. On Gary's tax dollars? 3 free meals and a bed?" Gary realized the law sometimes protects the monster more than it heals the victim, and Gary had no intention of letting this scumbag breathe the same air as his son for one more second. While waiting, Gary drowned in whiskey at a local bar. The fire of revenge burned every nerve ending. Then, Lady Luck, or rather, the Grim Reaper smiled at him. A friend from the TV news station dropped by. Accidentally or not, he blurted out golden intel. Jeff was being flown back to Louisiana on March 16th. American Airlines Flight 595. Pedophile's travel itinerary should never be shared at a bar. Or maybe, it absolutely should. Gary's eyes lit up. He had the place. He had the time. The only mission left was prepping his gear. Night of March 16, the Baton Rouge airport was bustling with flashing cameras of reporters waiting for their prey. They wanted the perp walk. They were about to get a hardcore action movie. Gary appeared. No hitman armor, just camouflaged in a pulled-down cap and sunglasses. He stood quietly at the public payphones, left hand on the receiver, right hand deep in his jacket pocket. 9:30 p.m. the crowd gasps. Cops surround Jeff, clearing a path right past the payphones. The TV lenses point right at Jeff's face. The moment Jeff entered the perfect crosshairs, Gary calmly said into the phone, "Catch you later." Hear the shot. He dropped the receiver. He spun around flawlessly. Without a second of hesitation, Gary pulled the trigger. Boom! Justice was cleanly delivered at 1,000 feet per second. The WBRZ camera caught the whole and sense of execution. Cops panicked. They tackled Gary to the floor. Gary didn't resist. He dropped his weapon, looking oddly peaceful. The cop yelled, "Why? Gary, why?" I guess he forgot that asking a dad why he shot the monster who ruined his kid is the stupidest question in law enforcement history. The public went wild supporting Gary. Terrified of a riot, the judge gave him the most ridiculous murder sentence ever, 0 days in prison. Gary later said, "If it was your kid, you'd do the same." A rare win for jungle law in a civilized society. During the agonizing wait, Gary sank into whiskey at a local bar. The fire of revenge was burning every single nerve ending. And then, Lady Luck, or more accurately, the Grim Reaper smiled upon him. A friend working at the local TV news station happened to drop by. Whether by accident or on purpose, he blurted out a piece of golden intel. Jeffrey Doucette was going to be escorted back to Louisiana on the evening of March 16th on American Airlines Flight 595. A critically fatal piece of intelligence. The travel itinerary of a pedophile should absolutely never be shared at a drinking joint. Or perhaps, it absolutely should be. Gary's eyes lit up. He had the location. He had the time. The only mission left now was to prepare the tools for the job. Night of March 16th, Gary disguised himself simply. No professional hitman gear, just a pulled-down cap and sunglasses. The Baton Rouge airport was bustling. It was flooded with the flashing lights of reporters waiting for their prey. They wanted to film the beast being perp-walked in handcuffs, bowing his head and shooting before the cameras, but they were about to witness a hardcore action movie instead. Gary appeared. He stood quietly, hidden in the row of public payphones in the main corridor. Left hand holding the receiver, pretending to call his best friend. Right hand shoved deep into his jacket pocket, where he concealed a revolver. Around 9:30 p.m., the crowd suddenly roared. Police surrounded Jeff Doucet, clearing a path to escort him right past the row of phones. The sound of footsteps grew closer. Dozens of TV lenses and flashbulbs were aimed directly at Jeff's face, blinding everyone to the danger lurking in the corner. The very moment Jeff walked into the perfect crosshairs, Gary calmly spoke into the receiver. "Catch you later. Hear the shot." He let the receiver drop. He spun around with a motion as smooth as if he had practiced it 1,000 times. The weapon came up. Without a single second of hesitation, Gary pulled the trigger. Boom! A bullet planted itself absolutely perfectly. Justice was cleanly delivered at over 1,000 feet per second. The teacher collapsed to the floor like a literal sack of garbage. The WBRZ news camera captured this entire historical moment perfectly. A public, live, unfiltered execution. The police descended into absolute panic. They lunged forward to tackle Gary down. Gary didn't resist at all. He dropped the gun, his face strangely calm. One officer, who happened to know Gary, screamed in utter confusion. Why Gary? Why? Perhaps that cop forgot that when you ask a father why he shot the man who ruined his child. It is historically the stupidest question in law enforcement. Jeff Doucet survived the night, but breathed his last the very next day at the hospital. No response for monsters. Not a single drop of tear was shed anywhere in the world. Except, of course, for the tears of absolute joy from millions of Americans watching the assassination tape replayed on national television. The media had a field day. Ratings went through the roof. Now, the ball of responsibility was violently kicked into the court system's face. Gary was officially charged with second-degree murder. The law is the law, after all. A life sentence was dangling right over his head. But the Louisiana state government immediately found itself stuck in a ridiculously tight spot. The public went absolutely ballistic. They weren't mad at Gary. They were ready to go to war for him. Thousands of support letters flew onto the judge's desk like an avalanche. Legal defense fundraising campaigns popped up like mushrooms after rain. People were literally throwing money at him. Local radio stations opened call-in polls continuously, and 100% of callers screamed the exact same thing: free that man. The legal system realized a spine-chilling truth. If they actually locked Gary Plorch behind bars, the citizens would literally burn the courthouse to the ground. And so, a magnificent piece of legal theatre was born. Pure concession. Gary accepted an unspoken plea deal behind closed doors. The judge tapped his gavel, cleared his throat, and delivered what is perhaps the most ridiculous sentence in US history for premeditated murder. 7 years suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service. Not a single day in prison. Let me repeat that, 0 days behind bars. Basically, the judge signed a certificate that said, "You are guilty of murder, but since the guy totally deserved it, have a nice day." Later, when a reporter asked Gary for the reason behind his cold-blooded action, Gary simply shrugged and delivered a legendary quote: "If someone did that to your kid, you'd do the exact same thing." A perfectly balanced sentence of conscience. A rare victory for jungle law right in the middle of a civilized society. And most importantly, a bloody warning to anyone who even thinks about touching children. 1848. A man named Sam Brannan was checking books at his newly opened general store in what is now Sacramento. A few years prior, Sam, a Mormon, had frantically fled religious persecution on the East Coast. He drifted to the West Coast, landing in a dreary, boring port town called San Francisco. In his short time here, Sam proved himself an alpha wolf in the business world. He opened a newspaper, built a flour mill, and now a general store for supplies. Things were going pretty smoothly for a startup guy. Until one fateful afternoon, a few rough, heavily bearded men walked into his store. These guys worked at John Sutter's sawmill in Coloma. They tossed some items on the counter. Sam gave them the price. Instead of pulling out chipped coins like normal customers, one man unhurriedly untied a small leather pouch. He He opened it and poured a brilliant pile of gold dust onto the micro scale. Sam Brannan's eyes popped out of his skull. Real gold. Where did a bunch of smelly lumberjacks get this much gold to buy flour? He immediately rode straight to Coloma to investigate for himself. Talking to the workers, he discovered a shocking truth. The bottom of the American River was filled with gold. Pure gold. They claimed you could gather all of California to dig for 50 years and still not run out. Any normal guy hearing this would instantly strip, grab a basket, and dive into pan for gold. But not Sam Brannan. He was smarter than that. Gold diggers might get rich or starve, but the guy selling shovels to them will definitely become a billionaire. He began plotting one of the greatest and dirtiest marketing campaigns in American history. Sam quietly bought up every shovel, pickaxe, and pan in the entire territory, not leaving a single nail behind. He hauled it all back to his store in Sacramento. Then he ordered his staff to jack up the prices to extortionate levels. A 20-cent pan became $15. Artificial inflation created by a cold-blooded monopolist. With the trap set, Sam laid the bait. He stuffed gold dust into a glass bottle, put on a dapper suit, and stepped onto SF's busiest street, holding the bottle high to let the sparkling gold blind the passers-by. Then he screamed with all his lung capacity, "Gold! Gold on the American River!" The mob mentality exploded faster than gunpowder. 75% of men in SF abandoned homes and ran east to find fortune. And of course, on the way to the gold fields, the only pit stop selling tools was Sam Brannan's general store. In just 9 weeks, Sam pocketed $36,000, about $1.4 million today. He became California's richest man just by selling scrap metal. But the price of prosperity always comes with trash. News spread globally. By 1850, SF bloated from a boring 1,000-person town to a chaotic mega-city of over 25,000. Trailing behind the dreaming gold diggers were bloodthirsty vultures. Crime skyrocketed. The tiny, lazy, and corrupt police force was utterly helpless. The worst were the Sydney Ducks, a gang of violent ex-convicts deported from Australia. Their mo was simple: set a fire on one side of town to distract cops, then leisurely smash and loot stores on the other side. Anyone in the way got their skull ventilated. Unlucky enough to get caught, just shove some gold bars into the judge's pocket and walk right out. Justice was priced in gold pots. May 4, 1851, a fire sparked by the Sydney Ducks torched over 2,000 buildings, $10 million damage. Sam Brannan watched his real estate burn. He realized waiting for cops to solve crime is like waiting for a turtle to fetch a beer. Hopeless. June 9, 1851. Sam summoned the city's heavy hitters and elites. He declared the legal system dead. If they wanted to protect their wallets, they had to get their hands bloody. Nobody objected. That night, the San Francisco Committee of Vigilance was born. A group of assassins in suits. Took exactly 24 hours for their grand opening. The next day, a Sydney Duck was caught red-handed hauling a stolen safe. Instead of handing him to the cops, they dragged him to the square for a lightning-fast field trial. Defense procedures went straight in the trash. Verdict: guilty. Punishment: hanged immediately in front of hundreds. News of the execution hit like a shockwave. Robbed shopkeepers suddenly realized they had a way out. Within weeks, membership spiked to 700. For 3 solid months, they turned SF streets into a massive manhunt. They executed 4 ringleaders and kicked dozens of thugs onto boats, deporting them forever. The crime rate went into a free fall and hit rock bottom. By Sept 1851, citizens could walk at night without getting stabbed in the back. Seeing the cleanup was done, the committee auto-disbanded, handing power back to the government. A truly chivalrous retreat. But trash always knows how to respawn. Fast forward to 1855. San Francisco sank right back into the dark mud. Only this time, criminals didn't wear rags. They wore expensive suits and sat in City Hall. A corrupt syndicate seized every power position. They backed gangs, rigged elections, and embezzled funds. In 1 year, 480 murders occurred. Cops just stood and yawned. Disgusted, a journalist Bizzarelli named James King of William stepped up. He used his daily paper like a cannon. He directly targeted James Casey, a city supervisor who was actually an ex-con who bought his seat. Days later, he roasted Charles Cora, a notorious gambler who shot a marshal but got a court to later escape. Casey and Cora were besties. Casey blocked King on the street on May 14, 1856. He asked a fake threat, "Are you armed?" Without waiting, he drew his gun and blasted a bullet through the truth-teller's chest. King collapsed. Casey strolled into jail, thinking this was another short vacation protected by friends. He was wrong. He just woke a sleeping monster. When news broke, 10,000 citizens flooded the streets, surrounding the dying king. One furious roar echoed, re-established the committee. May 20th, King took his last breath. 2 days after the funeral, 3,500 heavily armed citizens dragged a cannon and aimed it straight at the city jail gates. They didn't negotiate. They broke the doors down. They dragged James Casey and Charles Cora outside. They strung ropes over a beam and hanged both goons in broad daylight in front of the entire city. The second committee was born. No guerrilla tactics this time. They played overthrow the government. Thousands stormed official buildings. They smashed double-bottomed ballot boxes used for election fraud and displayed them in the streets. They put guns to the heads of corrupt officials, forcing them to write resignations. They even arrested a California Supreme Court justice. The feds panicked. They sent Officer William Tecumseh Sherman to lead the local militia. Yes, the infamous Civil War General Sherman. But when Sherman arrived, comedy struck. Most of his troops deserted to join the Vigilance Committee, a general with no army. Sherman cursed, submitted his resignation, and quit. A pointless battle. In months, the committee erased the old government. Peak insanity, they formed their own political party called the People's Party. August 1856, city clean, they disbanded with a grand parade. 8,000 armed men marched like returning national heroes. A bloody coup cheered with roses. Happy ending for the city. But what about Sam Brannan, the gold rush spark, the first billionaire, the committee founder? The universe has a sick sense of humor. The Mormon church excommunicated him. Turns out, churches don't like followers leading civilian assassin squads. His wife, tired of his rampant cheating, filed for divorce. With sharp legal skills, she stripped him of all his assets, land, and money. He spent his final years alone, sick, and died completely penniless. SF's heroic garbage man was ultimately swept onto the street by fate like just another piece of trash. If only, before saving the world, Sam took a minute to sign a prenup. The American dream sometimes ends with a fatally hilarious banana peel slip exactly like that.